Guild Wars 2's Druid, probably one of the best healers of all time. Nerfed in the previous patch, but fixed in the current patch. It's back, and it's probably just as good as before. A little bit of a tweak to your previous playing style and you can play Heal Druid again. It's an incredible class with high Alacrity, Might, Fury, as well as massive CC. It brings so much utility to a lot of fights. Druid is capable of handling almost every mechanic on raid solo and is just an all-round god tier class. Let's just have a look at why it's so damn good. What makes Druid so good? First of all, just tons and tons of CC. With utilities, pets and weapons, you've got hard CC and soft CC. The Druid is probably one of the kings of CC and it's just an incredible class to have, especially as a support class. It brings a lot of utility to handle raid and strike and landscape mechanics. Druid is incredibly solo sufficient and also can do a lot of healing and mechanics from range. Druid is also incredibly versatile, being able to play as the support second healer or main tank. The Druid also brings a lot of utility to help the team achieve their goals, whether pushes or pulls or cleanses. The Druid is an ultimate support with so much utility. The drawbacks to Druid currently in this patch is that it uses Celestial Avatar to generate all of its alacrity and a majority of its might. This means that if you're unfamiliar with your healing and your damaging skills, you may not generate enough Celestial Avatar to keep up these boons, as well as have enough excess alacrity and might to be able to use Celestial Avatar more reactively than to use it just to generate boons. This means that newer players might struggle with certain mechanics in raids, maybe strikes and even landscape, to be able to react to damage that's incoming or to use your Celestial Avatar to do mechanics rather than just generate boons. Another drawback is that Druid is usually responsible for handling most mechanics in raids. This means that newer players might feel a lot of responsibility quite soon. But let me ease your fear into that. In terms of strikes, landscapes and some other content, Druid doesn't really do anything other than healing and boons. So if you are looking to get into raiding, Druid is definitely a much needed class and is definitely wanted in most raid groups. However, if you play just on landscape and strikes, you're still going to have an amazing time. And Druid at this point in time is definitely one of the best choices you can have. Now let's have a look at stats and armor. For armor, you can pretty much go for either complete harriers or givers, or a combination of the two. Obviously, if you're full harriers, you'll be the off healer. If you've got full givers, you'll obviously be the main healer. And if you're a combination of the two, you'll probably be the tank and maybe do still a little bit more damage than if you were full givers. I run kind of just a general combination of the two. And for runes, you want Rune of the Monk. Rune of the Monk is found in the Asolonian Catacombs. It is the meta rune for basically all boon healers. Just how good it is for its output of healing. You can obviously trade any dungeon currency for these, and you definitely need them going forward if you want to play any boon healer. For your weapons, you're probably going to want to use, for the general set, a staff, and then your offhand an axe warhorn. You can obviously use other things, longbow, shortbow, depending on what mechanics you want to do, but this is generally considered one of the better sets. You could obviously use an axe in the offhand for a pull and also a bit of projectile reflect. Generally, for the sigils, you want Transference. It's just the all-round best one for healing, and the Sigil of Paralyzation, just for a bit of extra CC. You can obviously switch out these for, Sigil of Water or Sigil of Concentration, but do note that you'll have to play with your armor pieces to drop your boon duration down a little bit. But generally, this is probably the best setup to go for. There isn't as much play in this Druid build as my previous Druid guide, so we will get more into that when we look at the trait tree. Generally though, what you're aiming for is just over 95% concentration. To cap with your food, you're going to want to be at 95.33, but this is generally considered a very good spot to be in. And for food and utilities, for food you want any food with 100 healing power as its main stat and 70 concentration as its orb stat. That 70 concentration will account to about 4.67% boon duration, and that will take me just under 100%. Obviously hitting 100% is also good, but that's pretty much close enough. You could obviously take any food. This one is the minus incoming damage, but you can also take the plus outgoing healing. It really depends what you're doing. If you're main tanking, perhaps you want the minus incoming damage. But if you're just doing some healing, perhaps you want the outgoing healing. For utilities, there's pretty much only one way to go, and that's Bountiful Maintenance Oil. This just increases your outgoing healing by so much that it's just not really viable not using it. Now let's have a look at your traits and specializations. Unfortunately, due to the way that Druid was affected in the previous 2 patches, there is less flexibility in the build and actually playing style, and that's where I'm going to try and kind of guide you in this build. Firstly, Nature's Magic. The first minor trait, Rejuvenation, is just something to be aware of. When using your F2, i.e. your Beast skill, you will also grant regeneration around you. These skill tooltips are not popping up, so just be aware of it, that when you use this skill, you are going to get regeneration. So just make note of that, because that's quite important in terms of your healing output. In your first column, there's pretty much only one choice, and that's Wellspring. The reason why is when we use our heal skill, we're also gaining regeneration. But not just that, we're also getting healing power based off of our power. This especially makes certain builds where you're using Harriers even better, because you are going to get extra healing power from the actual stats of the gear. And also, take note that this regeneration is not showing up on the tooltip, but when you use your healing skill, you will see that regeneration will be applied. If you don't want to have a look at Wellspring, perhaps you're in a bit of a lower tier group, Ally's Aid might be a fairly good one to have. Search and Rescue. So basically, when you revive an ally, your pet will cast Search and Rescue and basically teleport an ally to them and start to res it itself. This can be pretty massive, although remember it is on a 60-second cooldown, so that is pretty large. But this can be useful in certain cases, especially if you're in bad groups or on landscape. This could be quite life-saving. Minor trait 2, Fortified Bond. When you gain a boon, your pet shares the boon with you. This is obviously just a really good trait, and obviously it's going to help with your pet support. Now in column 2, again, pretty much only one choice in my opinion, and that's Spirited Arrival. The reason why is that my generation on the Druid is quite tough at the moment if you don't actively play the Druid. You can't camp anymore. You can't camp a pet, you can't camp an ability. You've got to be using pet abilities and swapping pets. When you swap pets, you're basically gaining 6 stacks of might on quite a decent duration, as well as Fury. This is huge in terms of maintaining good might output. Now in column 2, if you have some god tier herald, maybe that's giving you some major support, maybe you don't have to take Spirited Arrival because your might is capped. You can obviously look at different options. Windborne Notes, obviously getting a bit of regen and healing with Warhorn skills is pretty massive. And obviously an Evasive Purity as well. Dodging, removing a damaging and a non-damaging condition from you can be fairly useful. Lingering Magic. Basically that you gain concentration as well as your pet, and also regeneration on you is 20% more effective. That's massive in terms of, especially when you're the tank, regeneration, which is quite easy to come by via these 2 traits here, is just going to be keeping you up so much easier. Now in column 3, we've got a couple of interesting choices. Nature's Vengeance is obviously a second slam, but do note there is 3 seconds in between each slam. This can be interesting for certain cases, like when you want the double CC on Storm Spirit, perhaps for certain fights. You can have a look at this. It is not that bad. Lesser Guard, Protective Ward. Basically when swapping pets, you're going to get Lesser Guard. Only 1 stack of might, which isn't that great, but the most biggest draw to this is the 33% damage reduction for 4 seconds. This can be pretty massive in certain fights where you do want to reduce the incoming damage. This can absolutely save some groups and is definitely an option that you can consider. Do note that it is on a 15-second cooldown even with your pet swaps being active. The meta choice is to take Invigorating Bond. When using your beast ability, i.e. your F2, you'll get quite a large heal, protection and vigor. This is pretty massive. Sometimes it doesn't show up on the tooltip, but all of these abilities will be there. You can see the healing, the protection and the vigor and the 300 radius around you. And this is where the build gets less flexible. Obviously we have to go into marksmanship rather than being able to go into skirmishing, and I'll show you why. First, your minor trait, Open-End Strike. The first strike when entering combat inflicts 5 stacks of vulnerability. This is fairly good, as even as a healer, it's incredibly useful to provide vulnerability so that we can make sure that we're at full damage at all times. In column 1, there's only one way to go, and this is pretty much most of the reason why we go into marksmanship. Clarion Bond. When swapping pets, we basically cast a lesser Call of the Wild. We get 6 stacks of might on a very short duration though, only 9 seconds, as well as fury and swiftness. This is quite a massive skill and definitely a way that we use to keep up might. Your second minor trait, Alpha Focus, providing a little bit of cripple when using opening strike. And in column 2, another massive trait, Moments of Clarity. What this does is that it basically increases the duration of your stases and stuns. This basically equates to more CC. So when using CC skills, this will make it a lot stronger. This is a lot of the reason why druids are just such incredible CC machines. Do notice that there is a 3-second interval, so staggering may need to occur. Column 3 is very interesting as there are a couple of choices here that can seem minor in most cases, but can be very useful in certain fights. Predator's Onslaught, basically increasing our damage by 15% on disabled, defiant, or movement impaired foes. Basically all bosses will be defiant, so we will get this majority of the time, and this will increase our output damage. But as a healer, your damage is quite low. Remorseless, very interesting. Regain opening strikes when gaining fury, and that will then help you to keep up decent vulnerability. This kind of can be decent, although your vulnerability duration is quite low because you do not have any expertise. But Lead the Wind is an important skill to be aware of. What this allows you to do is to pierce with your longbow. When druids do a lot of mechanics in raids, whether it's Samrog or Soulless Horror, sometimes you might get targets moving in front of each other when trying to push them with your longbow. This means that Lead the Wind can be useful to make sure that the target you want to push is not body blocked by some other target. So generally when a longbow is used, you will switch to Lead the Wind. And now for your elite specialization, Druid. The first minor trait, Celestial Avatar, getting access to Celestial Avatar and the skills thereof. In column 1, Cultivated Synergy is generally the preferred choice. When using healing skills, you heal the allies around you and your pet for even more healing. So this just makes your healing output better. There are interesting options like Druidic Clarity, which basically removes quite a large number of conditions when you go into Celestial Avatar. Although when you're in Celestial Avatar, you have access to Celestial Avatar 2 and a few other skills. So generally Conduit Cleanse isn't as much of a problem, but in certain fights like maybe your Soulless Horrors or your Slothers are in some bad pug groups, this could be an important choice. Another option, Blood Moon. Daze enemies when you enter Celestial Avatar, as well as inflict bleeding on them if you've immobilized them. So basically this is just like a little bit of an extra DPS, although some people might use it for the extra days, i.e. more CC. But generally, Cultivated Synergy is fairly good. The second minor trait, Live Vicariously. When you heal an ally, you are also healed by a small amount. Listen, this isn't much, but it's still very good for you, as especially when you're tanking, just for some extra heals. Your burst AoE healing is just going to be keeping you up even easier. Now in column 2, Verdant Etching is generally the way to go, as we gain protection when we use glyphs. So just using all of these glyphs is just going to help us stack up some protection uptime. This can be fairly good. But if you do have some other class that's supporting you, perhaps you've got a Herald or something that's providing protection uptime, you can obviously look at Celestial Shadow for some stealth and super speed, or even Natural Balance, not for the damage necessarily, but maybe for the minus incoming damage. If you are struggling as a tank, you can consider this. But generally, Verdant Etching is still a very good skill to have. Your third minor trait, Natural Mender. Basically getting increased healing to others 20%, as well as gaining 8 Celestial Avatar energy every 3 seconds. So basically just helping you try get Celestial Avatar, especially during split phases where maybe you can't heal or damage. This will just allow you to kind of cap up your Celestial Avatar so that when the next phase happens, you're ready for it. And in column 3, there's only one choice possible, Grace of the Land. This is the ability that allows us to generate Alacrity when using Celestial Avatar skills. So as a newer player going through this trait tree specializations, you will notice a few key concepts. Using your F2 ability and switching pets, as well as using your Celestial Avatar abilities to generate boons. This is pretty much the crux of how we will play. I'll get into it as I talk about the rotation concept, but you'll just notice that having a look at this trait tree, how it's changed substantially from very reactive gameplay to very aggressive gameplay. Now let's have a quick look at some of our weapon skills. I went into a lot of Druid in very great depth in my last Druid guide. I'm just going to touch on a few of them now. Basically for Axe, the might that we generate from throwing the Axe is only for ourselves. So don't really rely on this too much and think, okay, cool, my might's covered, everybody else's might's covered. So yeah, don't get into that trap. Split blade, obviously pretty good. We're talking about skills now to generate Celestial Avatar, right? We want to make sure that when we're out of Celestial Avatar and we're trying to recover our skills, we're doing as much DPS as possible. And Split blade's a good way to do that. 5 hits, pretty big, as well as bleed. This will generate quite a substantial amount of Celestial Avatar. Obviously, Axe 3, not as much, but still a good skill to use. This is more for your soft CC, your chill, and your weakness to try slow foes down. This will basically help you deal with a lot of mechanics as a druid. But still, we can use this to generate some decent Celestial Avatar. Skill 4, Hunter's Call. Massive skill for generating Celestial Avatar. 16 hits of 1.3k. It is huge, as well as 16 stacks of vulnerability. This is an incredible skill and should be almost used off of cooldown when trying to generate Celestial Avatar. Call of the Wild is quite an interesting skill because obviously we want that 6 stacks of might for 24 seconds. It is huge, the fury and the swiftness, but we also really do want to use this for dazes. So my advice to you is to try use this off of cooldown unless you think CC is coming. And if you have a group where there is quite a lot of high CC, maybe you've got a couple of like heralds or something pottering around with staffs, then I would definitely just keep on using this skill and use my other skills for CC. Into the staff. Remember, Solar Beam, we can use it to shoot not just one target, but through different targets, either healing or damaging 3 targets. So you can either select the boss or maybe another ally that's more forward and basically shoot it in a straight line so that it uses this line to heal or damage anything that moves through it, up to 3 targets. Astral Wisp, basically sending out a wisp onto a target to either damage or heal up to 4 pulses. It's a definitely good skill to just kind of throw out, especially when you want to top people off or get some big healing after a mechanics happen. Staff 3, Ancestral Grace, an absolute massive skill. Remember, the protection's only for your pets, so don't get too excited about that. A big healing skill, but not just that, it's a blast finisher. You need to try and combo this with certain things like your Staff 5, so i.e. throw down Staff 5 and then blast into it for an absolute explosion of healing, i.e. like this. You basically blast into it and you get that healing aura to do some huge healing. Staff 4, Vine Surge. This damages a very small amount, but not just that, this is a massive immobilized skill with 7 impacts, as well as removing movement pairing effects. This could be quite massive in certain fights where an ally maybe gets chilled, slowed, or crippled, and I'm thinking about fights like the Conjured Amalgamate. This could be quite massive to make sure that people aren't slowed down when collecting swords and shields. Star 5, Sublime Conversion. What this does is convert damaging projectiles into healing, so massive to throw down in certain fights like Matthias, the last boss of Wing 2, as basically when he smashes the ground and throws out those damage and auras, you could turn that all into massive healing. As well, this is also a regeneration effect, so you can throw it down and allies can move through it to obviously get some regen. Remember, regeneration that we're putting out is more effective on us, and also it's a massive way to make sure that we have to do less healing. In general, as a healer, if you can make sure that protection and regeneration are always on target, your job gets so much easier. Now, I'm not going to go too mental on a lot of the other weapons and such, but the things to be aware of is obviously Barrage, 12 hits to generate some Celestial Avatar. Rapid Fire, 10 hits to generate a large amount of Celestial Avatar, as well as Vulnerability. But the most important skill is Point Blank Shot. It's a knockback that knocks back the closer you are to the target, the further it's going to knock it back. So in certain fights, you might have to push the Tormented Dead, or rig him in Samrock, or even just use a skill for some massive CC. It's definitely a good weapon to have. Then if you use an axe in your offhand, you can obviously use Axe 4 to help pull in a target or two from quite far away. It's very good at that. And remember that Axe 5 is also a projectile refill, which could be quite clutch in a lot of fights. And now let's have a look at some of the good utilities, and there are quite a few to look at. In healing skills, we've got a few good options. Glyph of Rejuvenation is a very good option. When using it out of Celestial Avatar, you heal yourself for a large amount and heal allies for a minor amount. Remember, this also produces protection because of our traits that we've taken. But if we go into Celestial Avatar, you'll notice that it flips around and we get healed by less and we heal allies around us for more. This is obviously massive skill and definitely I would say probably my favorite to use going forward. Other skills that are fairly good, Healing Spring is massive when it comes to condition cleansers. We're throwing down the Healing Spring, getting some heals as well as regeneration and 2 condi cleansers every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. So i.e. you can rip off a large amount of conditions using the skill. And remember, even though it's 5 targets, if you move in and out of the Healing Springs, you can cleanse an entire raid group using 1 Healing Spring. And then also Water Spirit. Water Spirits has changed quite a lot, or spirits in general have changed as you can place them. So this allows you to do more ranged healing. Perhaps you're kiting on Sabbatha or something like this and you just want to be able to paint the group from range. You can throw it down and it will provide some regeneration as well as vigor. Now 2 skills that I would say are almost non-negotiables is basically your Sun Spirit, as you need this to generate might. Obviously there's the soft CC with the blind, it's a burning stacks. No one really cares about. But you'll notice that the might does ramp up nicely, as this is a 20-second cooldown without alacrity, and we're getting 29 seconds of might, which means that eventually this will basically generate enough might to sustain a lot of the might that you need to generate to cover the 25 stacks. Stone Spirit has become absolutely huge. 4 seconds of prot, but more importantly, the Aegis. The Aegis is huge. Having access to Aegis outside of the pet is what's making Druid a lot more competitive in a lot of classes. Some fights like your Daimos CMs or your Kadim 1 CMs, this is an incredibly massive skill. Obviously the cripple and the weakness, a bit of soft CC, but we're not interested in that. It's more for the Aegis and the protection, and that makes these 2 skills almost non-negotiables. And then your third utility slot is the one you can maybe switch out. I like Glyph of Equality. It's a stun break, it's stab, it's the protection because we traded it. It's a massive daze, i.e. Defiance Breakbar. And then obviously when you use Celestial Avatar, it changes. It's still got the stun break element, the stability, the protection, but it also cleanses condis. It's a massive skill. For other utilities, you can always look at things like Glyph of Unity for a bit more AoE healing on your party. Glyph of Tides, decent push and pull. Mostly this is used a lot in certain fights to try and angle ads that need to be dealt with. Search and Rescue obviously for landscape or maybe some really bad raid groups can obviously be very clutch. God, I made a mistake in my last video where I didn't include this and someone was like, dude, this is a good ability, and I read through it and I was like, yeah, it's actually pretty good. Obviously remember there's a trait that does a similar thing. Protect Me, obviously stun break as well as barrier, which can be pretty good. Remember this one breaks allies out of stuns as well, so this can be quite clutch. Remember Storm Spirit, this is a range stun which can be pretty useful. You know, sometimes you're in a slow bazaar and he decides to go break bar inside of the sludge. This is kind of a way of reaching him without having to go in there to hit certain skills. Things like muddy terrain for maybe a bit of a mob, slow, and cripple. Obviously a lot of soft CCs, but this can also be used to deal with certain ads and some encounters. Remember, all of these signets are fairly good in different ways. Some make you move quicker, generate health, make you invulnerable for a time. Then some immobilize ads for quite a bit of time. And remember also the trap. The spike trap also a fairly decent break bar, which is unblockable, which is fairly good. And then onto the main course, the elite utilities. Obviously still Glyph of Stars is just such a good ability, removing conditions as well as when Celestial Avatar. Using the skill will help revive targets that are down per pulse, as well as provide some huge abilities as well as stab. This is a massive skill to have and probably my main choice that I would stick with. But obviously Nature's Spirit can be good. Certain fights, especially where you think that people might go down, or if your hand kites in, things like this, having this ability with you can just kind of create a lot of passive healing as well as just a good way of keeping allies alive. Entangle, massive skill for rooting ads in place. This is used quite a bit in fights like Gorseville. In some groups that don't have much DPS, they tend to try and mobilize all the ads, allowing the group time to move around and kill them all. If you do need some sort of personal stability with quite a large amount of stacks, Strength of the Pack is fairly good for that. But this now let's have a look at your Celestial Avatar skills. Celestial Avatar skill 1, Cosmic Ray. A nice spammable heal skill. Remember, we have a large range on this, 1200 radius, which means that it's quite good to get some, maybe an off group that's doing mechanics, to be able to spam them with some semi-decent healing. Remember, our skills are generating Alacrity on their impact zone. So remember, this has a 240 radius, so this means that it is quite a narrow skill. Make sure to coat everybody when using the skill to make sure they get in Alacrity. Celestial Avatar skill 2, Seed of Life. Quite a massive skill. A heal, a blind, but more than that, removing 3 conditions on 5 targets with a 240 radius. This is quite massive. What's also really nice about this skill is it can be cast during other skills, so that means that it won't interrupt the skills or anything that you're doing when casting the skill. Celestial Avatar skill 3, Lunar Impact. A massive burst heal as well as a daze and a Defiance break bar. This has got quite a large radius as well, meaning that it coats a lot of targets with Alacrity. Try use this skill when you're inside of your Celestial Avatar rotation. Celestial Avatar skill 4, Rejuvenating Tides. A massive healing skill as well as stacking might. 5 pulses on 5 targets. It is a huge skill. This is also one of the skills you need to hit inside of your Celestial Avatar to make sure that we have enough might to get our 25 stacks of might. It's also a brilliant way to try generate a couple of stacks of Alacrity. Celestial Avatar skill 5, Natural Convergence. A big damaging pulsing skill that's channeled, provides a lot of might, cripple and slow, and when fully channeled will drop 5 stacks of immobilization. This is quite a massive skill to help deal with mechanics in certain raid encounters. It also provides personal stability. Remember, when using the skill, you cannot move, otherwise you will cancel it. So you need to find a place where you can be stood. You could use skill 4 to move around and use skill 5 when you know you're going to be in spot for a while, as you cannot move when channeling this skill. Now let's talk about some of the pets. I've mentioned before the ones I like and the ones I don't like in my previous guide, but I'll go through a few of them again. Obviously for massive CC, I like the Electric Wyvern and the Rockazal combination. Those 2 guys are generally my bread and butter for most fights. But if I do need invisibility, smoke scale, if I do want a good pull, immobilize, as well as some confusion damage, a Boga, fairly good. If I do want to have high stacks of immobilization, Jacaranda, fairly good. If I do want regeneration for some reason, Fernhound, not bad. And obviously, if you are struggling for your might output, using the Jungle Stalker for the 5 stacks of might for 15 seconds is very good. Also, remember your brown bear does have its condition removal, which can be useful in some fights, especially in some low experience groups. There are a few other options, but those are the ones I'll generally stick with. Now let's talk about the rotation concept. It's quite tough to explain exactly a rotation because it's not set in stone. You're playing reactively as a druid, but at the same time you need to know where your priorities lie. Now let's talk about it. What is more important at the start of the fight? Getting up decent alacrity or might? Now I would propose to you that might is more important, because alacrity, even if you've cast a skill and it's on cooldown, if you apply alacrity afterwards, obviously that skill just regenerates faster. So most classes are starting with quite large bursts in their burst window at the start of a fight. So if we can get their might up, that means that their burst will hit harder, and then afterwards we can supply alacrity. So generally when I like to start a fight, I like to try and get might up to 25 as quickly as possible. So generally I'm going to use Warhorn 5 and throw down my Sun Spirit immediately. You want to try throw the Sun Spirit as early as possible, because what this does is it ramps up to 8 stats. It doesn't just start at 8 stats. So once you throw it down, you'll see it goes to 2, to 4, and so on and so forth. So you want to do that. You obviously want to use your Warhorn 5 to push yourself up some more. Then remember, you will be in combat, not like I am now. So by swapping pets, you will cast Lesser Call of the Wild for another 6 stacks of might. This will help you ramp up your might quite quick. Then once you've used those abilities, then I would go into my Celestial Avatar. Now it's quite tough to try and tell you exactly what to do, because your first couple of Celestial Avatars, I'd say your first 2 to 3 Celestial Avatars, you want to try and build up your reserves of Alacrity so that you can play more reactively rather than have to go into Celestial Avatar because your Alacrity is running out. So generally what I would do is I'd go into Celestial Avatar, try hit Seed of Life, and to cast, say, maybe Celestial Avatar 5 at the same time. Then obviously going into 4, casting the Seed of Life as often as possible, because remember, it doesn't interrupt anything. This will give you enough Celestial Avatar to play with, because remember, we'll be able to get it back before this runs out. Not only will a rotation like that help you generate tons of Alacrity, but also remember that Celestial Avatar skills 4 and 5 also generate some might. This can be quite huge in terms of making sure that your might hits 25. And generally that's the mindset I go into a fight with, is let me pump off my weapon skills, go into Celestial Avatar, cap off my might, and make sure obviously that my Alacrity is capped. Once that's done with, remember that even if there isn't CC and you don't foresee CC happening within the next couple of seconds, to use your F2 ability, to try and stack some protection, vigor, and regeneration. You almost want to swap pets off of cooldown and almost use your F2 skill off of cooldown. Remember that obviously using their F2 ability and then providing them with Alacrity will make their abilities recharge quicker. So with that in mind, remember that our rejuvenation and our invigorating bond on 20-second cooldowns. So for pets like the Wyvern that has a 30-second cooldown, you can use this off of cooldown and you will get both abilities. However, using pets like the Rockazel that have a 20-second base cooldown when affected with Alacrity will mean that if you use this off of cooldown, you are not going to get those traits proc in at the same time. So sometimes you might want to stagger these, or if not, maybe switching to your other pets and then using their abilities will mean that you maintain those boons at all time. Remember, having high regeneration, protection, and vigor is going to help your overall survival of your team. Protection and regeneration will mean that everybody's taking less damage and healing off of the minor raid ticking damage. And the extra vigor will mean that people have more dodges so that they can avoid as much incoming damage as possible. But in the upside again, remembering that now most of your skills are actually reactive. The only one you're pretty much casting off of cooldown is Sun Spirit. Obviously Stone Spirit, you don't really need that 4 seconds of protection, as remember, all of your glyph skills are giving you protection as well as your pet abilities. So you should have a fair amount of protection. This means that other than Sun Spirit and maybe say a few glyph abilities that you hit every now and then, you should be fine. That means that Stone Spirit can be used just to block attacks with Aegis, and also your Glyph of Stars can be used in some clutch situations to revive or give some stability when needed. Now remember as well, when coming out of Celestial Avatar, it's going to half your cashed out amount. So once you've used a certain amount you cash out, you will lose half of what's left over. Now you need to regenerate all of the Celestial Avatar so that you're prepared for your next Celestial Avatar use, because we need it obviously to keep up Alacrity. Remember, digging into your Axe Warhorn is probably the best way to go when there isn't much damage on the group. Using obviously skills 4 and 2 will mean that you're getting as many hits on a target as possible, i.e. generating as much Celestial Avatar as possible. However, if there is more damage on your raid group, rather go back to Staff and use your healing skills. Remember to blast Staff 5 with 3 to make sure that you're getting as much healing as possible, casting almost all of these abilities. Remember also that your actual heal skill is going to do some big AoE healing and also boon supply. So my opinion is, I think that Druid is definitely back. I think that this update has saved Druid, it's made it playable in higher tier content again, and generally Druid is such a good class that even in the state it's in, it's perfectly fine. It's a lot less flexible than it used to be. There's a lot less variety in terms of the gameplay style. But playing Druid itself is just so much more rewarding than playing a lot of the other Alacrity healing classes. A lot of them are quite simple and don't feel as involved. But playing Druid is such a fun time of managing not just your boons, but your resources, your positioning, as well as being able to move around so freely on the map. Druid is incredibly fun. I do recommend playing it for anybody who wants to try get into some raid in Fractals, landscape, just any meta events, is so fun. Unfortunately, it still will struggle slightly in Fractals, but having the source of two Aegises, one from the pet, the white tiger, and the other one from the stone spirit, has made Druid a little bit more competitive and actually probably playable in some small degrees in some harder tier content, especially Fractals and the like. But still, it will kind of struggle against things like Healbrand and the Ham, the healer Lakmek, but I definitely think that Druid has been saved by this patch, and I'd love to see it become even close to what it used to be. Again, thanks for all the support, thanks for watching, I really hope this was helpful. If it was, please like, subscribe, everything, and if not, just have a good one and hopefully see you in the next one. Cheers. For more on this build and others just like it, catch me streaming on Twitch. Stop by anytime and hang out. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and share with some friends. It will really help grow the channel.